the pain like.
Hey guys, dearyoongi here, and welcome back to my channel. Back in August of this year, the BBC started releasing a docu-series titled Made in Korea, the Kpop Experience. The show follows 5 boys from the UK who go to Korea for 100 days to be trained by none other than the team at SM Entertainment, using K-pop methodologies to see whether or not the group has what it takes to debut back home in the UK. The show ran for 6 episodes over 6 weeks, with the final episode airing on the 21st of September. And I know some of my non-UK viewers may not have heard about this one, so now the show is over, I thought it would be interesting for us to watch it back together and discuss it a little bit. So similarly to how I've done in the past, I'll be summarising each of the episodes in as much detail as I can, before sharing my thoughts on the show as a whole, as well as any issues I might have discovered along the way. So without further ado, because we already know this video is going to be a long one, let's start with episode 1. The synopsis for this episode says, immediately immersed into the world of K-pop, its culture and their challenge, the band from the UK discover the rigours and potential rewards as they meet their mentors and perform an evaluation. The episode starts with a mini trailer, if you will, same as a lot of shows do. It introduces K-pop as this major global success and phenomenon, explaining that in order to achieve this success that idols have, they need to train for up to 5 years in specialist centres. I wanted to keep that part in because those were the exact words they used, though of course we all know that this can majorly differ depending on the company and the person. The voiceover says, never before has a group from the UK been admitted into one of these training programs until now. And this is the first we see of who I'm assuming is our boy band, and it's them playing around and having fun in the airport. The voiceover goes on to explain that in a unique experiment, a boy band will be fast-tracked by the creators of K-pop, SM Entertainment, and if they pass, they will be debuted back home in the UK. We see teaser clips of some of the process and difficulties the members will be going through. We see the members looking stressed, training what appears to be the army, crying at times, etc. The voiceover continues, saying if they're going to make it, they need to impress Hee Jun-yoon, who is the director of the Artist Development Center over at SM Entertainment. We see her giving the boys some rather brutal critiques throughout their time in the show, telling one of the members he needs to grow up, telling another he can't even hit the right notes, and then telling another that he dances wooden. Okay, now onto the actual episode, which starts by telling us that at the end of 2023, a UK search for undiscovered talent began, with auditions focusing on dancing, singing, and personality. 5 boys were ultimately chosen, and we are told their names are Reese, James, Dexter, Blaze, and Ollie. We're told that the aim was to create a new K-pop inspired British supergroup, followed by somebody saying, we're looking for a boy band who can take over the world. Next we get a quick review of the history of K-pop, explaining that it first blew up in the 90s, and Joseph Chang, co-CEO of Kakao Entertainment, explains how K-pop music is often a mix of many genres rolled up into one, and that K-pop is very visual, focusing on styling, highly choreographed dance routines, etc. The voiceover tells us about how some of K-pop's successes in 2023 and 2024 have been astronomical. 6 of the top 20 best-selling artists in the world were K-pop in 2023, 90 billion streams were by K-pop artists, Blackpink were awarded MBEs by King Charles, aespa sold out the O2 Arena, 17 took Glastonbury by storm recently, and then we divert across to talking about how SM Town's festivals are super huge because this is the boy group's first stop on their K-pop adventure, attending the SM Town Festival concert. The first member we see speaking in his solo interview is Dexter, who explains how it was cold and rainy when they left Heathrow Airport in London, aka typical British weather. They flew 14 hours to get to Korea, and then they landed and boom, here you are. We see the boys at SM Town's festival. I think it was 120,000 other fans in the audience with them, and Ollie speaks about how insane of an experience that was. In his solo interview, Reese says he doesn't think he realised how upscale or how big it was, meaning the SM Town concert. And this was the first time the members felt like, okay, wow, this is what we're getting ourselves into. Next, we meet Chris Lee, who is Chief A&R Officer at SM Entertainment, who says there's about 200 million K-pop fans worldwide, and the industry is estimated to be worth $5 billion. Before we cut back to Joseph from earlier, who shares that he believes K-pop will continue to grow for the next 7 or 8 years, hopefully even longer. We meet Blaze in his interview next, who explains how impressive the vocals and dance precision were at the SM Town concert, and that this sets the bar at a very high standard for them. Reese says the group went backstage to get some tips from some of the K-pop idols who they'd seen perform, and we see them meeting Rise. They ask Rise how they came up with their name, and Anton explains how it's a combination of the words rise and realize, and that their team's sort of motto is to rise and realize their dreams in a way. Then we see them meeting Ten from Wavy. They ask him what his first experience performing at SM Town was like, and Ten explains that he was very nervous at first, but a year after debuting, he became more comfortable on stage, and that's just one of those things you learn along the way, really. Outside the concert, the groups are seen meeting and taking pictures with some fans, and they're very surprised how they can even have fans before they even start, but that of course makes them feel very happy and excited about the experience ahead. Next, we see them driving home, and James explains how they actually got to see Seoul for the first time. He describes it like something out of a Batman movie. He says there was so much life in the city, but at the same time he found it very daunting because he's never lived this far away from home before. The voiceover tells us that the boys will be living together in Itaewon during their time in Korea, and we see them exploring what appears to be a very nice looking house, being so excited by the nice big kitchen, the games room they have, definitely very different than what we all know as your typical idol dorm experience, I'm sure. Okay, now it's time for us to meet one of the members because we haven't really got any proper introductions yet. Dexter introduces himself first, telling us he's 22 years old and he's always been a performer since he was a little kid, and he's always dreamt of doing something like this. We see him now back home with his mum looking at pictures of his performances in the past. He explains that he'll miss his mum the most while he's away in Korea because he lives with her back home in London, so he's used to seeing her all the time. The boys are just chilling at their new home when they have an unexpected visitor named Joy, who is going to be the group's translator, and explains what they're going to be doing for the next 100 days. Joy tells them that they'll need to prepare a different performance every week for evaluation from Heejun, and every trainee goes through her. But it's not guaranteed that everybody is going to be there at the end of the program because not everybody makes it. The members look shocked by this, with Blaze telling us in his interview that he's not really feeling too great after hearing that. Reese even tells us that he could tell that Blaze took the news hardest, but that's the business at the end of the day, and if you can't keep up, you get cut. That's how the industry is here. Next scene, we cut to the boys singing and practicing a song, with the voiceover saying that this is the first thing any group needs, a sound, and that SM thinks this is the perfect song for them. Then we get to see a glimpse of the choreography the group will be learning to accompany it. We join the members in the practice room starting to learn the dance, and they're taken aback by how difficult it is. Our next formal introduction is with James. He's 23 and from Huddersfield in the UK, which is in like Yorkshire. He tells us that he has a twin brother named Lewis, and the pair post dance videos online, even creating their own dance trend. At the time, he said they have like 5.6 million followers on TikTok. I did my own nosying. For some reason, they're actually on less now, 5.5 million. Maybe that's just TikTok getting rid of old, inactive, or bot accounts, who knows. James tells us that this is a huge opportunity, and he wants to learn everything he can, but from the beginning, he's found picking up the choreography tough because he struggles to follow direction. Blaze tells us that dance is his main principle, and he appreciates the intricacies of movement. On the other hand, we see Ollie saying in the practice room that he's struggling a little bit, before telling us he's not super good at picking up dances because he comes from a more singing and modelling background. He gets to introduce himself next. Ollie is 20 and from Sunderland, which is like southeast of Newcastle. He explains how he sang in the choir at school and that he's super close with his mum and grandparents, who we see sending him off at the airport. We're moving away from the practice room. The voiceover explains that the boys will be taking opportunities to experience life in Seoul when they're not in rehearsals. Next scene is interesting. We see them having a Western standoff, with the boys standing there as a man approaches them dressed like Psy in the That music video with that old Western song, The Good, the Bad, the Ugly, playing in the background. If you heard it, you'd know exactly the one I mean. Their tour guide is local legend, they say, the K-pop cowboy, hence the old Western thing. I don't know. Apparently he does street interviews and K-pop interviews, and like content online. He explains that for their tour, he's taking them today to some iconic K-pop spots, starting with the Gangnam Style statue where they take pictures and do the dance. They then go to the Wall of Hands, next to take photos in some photo booths. They then go to a place called Haika, I think it was, in Jeongju, which is apparently a place where fans can go to make their own K-pop music videos. The K-pop cowboy splits them into 2 teams and challenges them to come up with their own dance challenge. Can I just say, I've been to Seoul and I have been to none of these places. I feel like, was I supposed to? Are these iconic K-pop fan hotspots? I went to none of them. Anyways, moving on. The voiceover text explains that the boys' break from training is short-lived, and over the next few days their rehearsals become even more intense. The next interview is with EXO's Suho, and he tells us that being a trainee is basically like having a full-time job, and the only time you're not training is when you are sleeping. Reese says he's never been so tired in his life, and this was completely relentless, while we see a compilation of them rehearsing and struggling with the choreo. The voiceover tells us that Ollie is struggling in the dance studio, and Reese is struggling with the vocals, with vocal coach Woo Ming-jeon. We see the choreographer calling out Ollie, saying, "When are you going to get this right?" trying to show him a footwork part he's been struggling with, and the vocal coach is telling Reese he needs to sing with more confidence. He tells him to look in the mirror at himself while he sings and smile, and it does have a kind of different vibe in his singing when he does that. I had to keep this part in because I was impressed by how something so simple seemed to work for him. Next, Reese tells us he's been a performer since he was age 4 or 5 in his introduction, and he feels like he can be himself on stage. He's been a cruise ship dancer for the last 8 months, but being in a boy band's always been a dream of his. A few days before evaluation, we're watching them rehearse again, and the choreographer is stressed. He's literally like holding his head in despair, while the members agree they're just not in sync. We meet Rise member Anton, who explains in his interview the importance of being in synchronization, because you need to remember that you're working as part of a team. The voiceover next tells us the guys are going to have a night off to have a night in with Super Junior's Shindong, who'll be giving the boys a lesson in Korean culture. He gives them rice wine to try and explains how the oldest drinks first, and then teaches them how to play Bunny Bunny. They play it again and again and drink more and more and have a fun old time. Moving on, it's only 2 days until their first evaluation, and another choreographer has been drafted in to help them master synchronization. They seem to be having fun in the workroom, but the new choreographer Sung Kwan Kim tells us they need to approach this more seriously. To help them work on themselves as a team, he suggests they get into a circle while dancing and watch the person opposite them rather than themselves in the mirror as they normally do to see what they're doing differently. Ollie tells us that he's feeling like he was holding the boys back in the first week, while we see the choreographer correcting him again and again. Blaze is in vocal training when we get his proper introduction. He tells us he's 19 years old and has been performing since he was about 7, and he went to the Brit School between ages of 14 to 18, which he loved. The Brit School is a very famous performing arts school here in the UK, which artists such as Adele and Amy Winehouse attended. Blaze tells us he's fully expecting high standards and long working hours, but he's very excited because this is his dream. As some of the members are struggling with the various aspects of K-pop training, wellness coach Jeannie Chang is brought in to help them cope with the emotional and mental challenges. She explains that she's there to check up on them and asks how they're doing. James explains it's been fun to work with such big name giants, but of course it's been difficult too, and is excited to see how good they can really get. Jeannie asks them how they're all getting along, and the group say they've become really close because of how intense the training has been, so they have to have each other's back. She then asks them to share their favourite things about each other to help them bond even more. Before we know it, we're on to their first evaluation day. The group discuss how nervous they are, but all they can do is put their all into it. In a very dramatic scene, which yes gets repeated every episode, we see Hee-jun Yoon heading towards the practice room for their evaluation, while the voiceover explains how she's been doing this for 20 years and therefore has a very high standard, and anybody who fails to meet them risks being cut from training. The group awkwardly stand in front of her saying hi, but she just asks them to start, and we see them dancing and singing live at the same time for the first time, cutting back to the judging panel every now and again so we can see their facial reactions. There's a very awkward pause when they finish, and Heejun asks them, based on your performance, do you think you did well? They don't really know how to answer, so she says, I want you to be exact. Out of 100, how do you think you did today? Going down the line, starting with Reese, he says 65, James says 35-40, Ollie says 65 to 70%, Blaze says 70%, and Dexter says 50. Heejun then says everything is concerning, but the scores you you gave yourself is what worries me. Do you guys really think that you can become artists like this? I don't think so. What makes you think you can do this? Where is this confidence coming from? Reese answers this with the passion. Heejun tells him that he was the best singer and dancer today before telling the group, I don't think you understand the dire situation you're in right now, and you can't even hit the right notes. How are you going to be a star? She even called their choreography nursery school level basic and tells them if their next performance is of the same level as this, it would be a waste of her time to even see it. Heejun leaves and calls an emergency meeting with the management team off camera. Of course, we aren't allowed to see it to add to the drama, and the boys meanwhile just stay in the practice room looking really stressed and deflated. Dexter tells the boys that the negative feedback made this feel super real, and Blaze tells the boys he thinks they all worked really hard this week and that he has a very different idea of a performer than what is idolized here in Korea. Reese tells the audience that Blaze probably took the negative feedback the hardest, then tells the boys he doesn't agree with his own personal feedback about him being the best singer and dancer. He tells us that during college he was always the guy in the back and never the one in the front and center that they love. A whole 50 minutes later, Dawn and Russ from the management team return to the boys in the practice room, asking them how they think it went. Russ says they need to go away and reevaluate everything, because the ultimate goal was to impress Heejun, and from what they heard from her in the meeting, she said the only reason she didn't go any harder on them was because she didn't want to make them cry. He tells Blaze that Heejun doesn't feel like he listened enough to her today, and reminds him that she is so important you need to take something on board when she tells you to do it. Dawn says they're not going to sugarcoat anything because there's a lot at stake. Russ says mediocrity doesn't cut it, and unless you're the best, they will not put their names to it. And that's the end of the first episode. Sorry, I know it's a lot, but there's always a lot in these first episodes of things where we meet everyone and get the gist of what the show's about. There is a little teaser for what's in next time's episode at the end of each episode, because he's aired once a week in the UK, but I won't go through what was in that because we're about to go straight into the episode right now. Episode 2. Synopsis for this one says, determined to bounce back from the underwhelming first evaluation, the band take on a dance challenge 555 meters in the air and perform live for the first time in front of an audience. The voiceover tells us that in this episode they're going to be attempting a live performance for the first time, and EXO Suho tells us that live performances are crucial in K-pop because it's what allows you to connect with fans. Our voiceover tells us that this week is a fresh start for the boys, with a new routine taught by a new choreographer, Sung Hyun-yu. Blaze tells us the choreographers here have a very high standard because they've trained with some of the biggest names in K-pop, and they're very direct with their feedback. The choreographer tells the boys that they'll be performing a new song in front of the students of the Seoul School of Performing Arts, and the group are visibly nervous now. We're told their new song is going to be called Solar, and of course it has a new dance for them to learn to. 4 of the members have performed in front of an audience before, except for James, so this will be an entirely new experience for him. He tells us he knows that this is going to be part of their future moving forward, but he is scared to be doing something so new to him. The choreographer tells them that they need to also be practicing when they go home too, specifically under Blaze's lead. He tells us that he was shocked to be made the group's leader for this week, considering he was told he had quite a bad attitude last week, but Dexter tells us that Blaze is the best dancer in the group, so he deserves to take the lead, and this will be good for him. Blaze tells us that he comes across as confident, but that's just a character that he built up for himself because he's naturally not a very confident person. Next we're going to the house, and the group are playing pool in their games room, or snooker? Pool, snooker. Hi my fiance, if you're watching this, which one was it? And we learn that James is struggling with his confidence too, but the group are playing around and trying to cheer him up, showing us how well they're all getting along. We rejoin the boys in the practice room, learning their new choreography for this week. Ollie tells us it's only day 2, but it's a lot harder than what he expected. The voiceover tells us that K-pop is famous for formation changes, and if they master it, it'll give them a unique identity in the British boy band market. James tells us everything about this routine is throwing him off. At the start, he was like, okay, this is cool, basic hip-hop, but the speed that it is at and the counts it's on are so difficult. We see him trying to practice on his own in the practice room, but he finds it harder without the group around him because he keeps forgetting it. The voiceover tells us that James is preoccupation with the idea of performing live is causing him to fall further behind with learning the choreography. So he grabs Ollie to help him, and then Dexter is there too, and they all go over it together. We switch over to working with Blaze in the studio, and the voiceover tells us he is still struggling with his vocals, because part of their new song Solar is in the highest octave they've had to try yet, and that K-pop artists are expected to sing with a far wider and higher range than Western groups. Is that true? I don't know, I've never personally noticed that before. Blaze tells us because his speaking range is usually quite low, he struggles with the higher notes and needs to start speaking higher, which the vocal coach jokes around about with him too in agreement. The voiceover tells us that during their soul adventure, the group will be guided through a number of quintessential soul experiences by Super Junior's Shindong, who tells them they actually look like a boy band today. To help them combat their nerves, he's having them do a dance challenge on top of the Lotte Tower, which is the tallest building in South Korea, to have them prove to themselves if they can do that, then they can do anything. The boys go up 555 meters high, and we're told 123 stories above Seoul is the Sky Bridge, where the group will be doing their dance. The group nervously shuffled onto the center of this bridge. Blaze seems to be having a great time while the rest of them are quite scared of being so high, but they all do their dance challenge up there, singing and dancing to their new song, while Shindong proudly watches on. Back on the ground, the group are rehearsing their vocals in a group session with vocal coach Jin Young Jang, but Blaze is struggling this time with what appears to be a sore throat, so he could not reach the high notes. Before we move on to the next scene, the voiceover tells us he's still trying to drill the choreo despite his vocal issues, and then we see the group practicing yet again, but not everybody is really following his lead, the voiceover says. We see James kind of chilling against the windows and telling us how he's low on energy this week. In the day before's rehearsal, he realized he had a knot in his leg and it hasn't gone away since, so he's still in pain today and has had to miss training, which is why he's kind of just sitting on the side. Because of Blaze's vocal issues and James's leg injury, it has prompted wellness coach Jeannie Chang from the first episode to return and check in on the group. She hasn't seen them since before their evaluation, so she asks how that went, and they share how bad their feedback was. They tell her they'll be performing live in front of 500 kids for the first time this week. Some of them joke that that's less nerve-wracking than going back to perform for Heejun. James disagrees because he's terrified by the idea of 1,000 eyes watching him. Next scene, the voiceover tells us that when things get too much for the band, they organise some time away to distress, and today have gone to Seoul's largest theme park, Lotte World, with the K-pop cowboy we met in episode 1. He has the boys dress up in school uniform because apparently people in Korea like to wear school uniforms to theme parks because it makes them feel like they're taking a trip down memory lane, going on a school trip. It's a bit of nostalgia. He takes them on some crazy high rides, some fast rides, some fun go-karting. Even though they're terrified on some of the bigger rides, they do them all anyway, and we get to see them having a lot of fun. Next day, we're told that Blaze is up bright and early and ready to dance, but not everybody is so keen. We see Blaze telling James he needs to work on the movements, and James agrees he has a lot of catching up to do, but his leg is feeling better. We join the boys in rehearsals, but they seem to be struggling to get on the same page. James wants to go over the parts he missed first, whereas Reese tells them they're working chronologically. Blaze is trying to take the lead on the dance as given to him, but James says they're all grown men and don't want to be feeling like they're getting told what to do, and they should be working as equals. As he is struggling getting on the same page with the rest of the boys, James decides to open up to them about his personal situation. He tells them he's not doing very well right now and that he has autism, so he gets overwhelmed and anxious, and things can get too much for him sometimes. The boys are all very respectful. Dexter asks if he can educate them on how to help him avoid becoming overwhelmed. James says one of the key things he really needs is patience because he will come around and catch up. It can just take time. Reese explains how with the time constraints it can make it hard not to be under pressure, but they need to learn how to accommodate one another and their learning styles so they don't lose any rehearsal time. The boys all give James a hug, and Blaze tells us he's really happy that James confided in them and it's only made them stronger as a group. The day has finally come for the boys' performance, but there's an issue. Some of the boys are at the house when they receive a call from James, who is at the doctor's. He tells the group he's feeling awful, has a fever and is fatigued. Dexter tells him not to worry about doing the performance if he doesn't feel up to it, but he says he wants to push through anyway. Unfortunately, the doctor tells James that he has tonsillitis, and the boys are kind of in limbo at the house waiting for him to return and to decide how they're pushing ahead with the performance. They're discussing what will happen if they have to perform as a 4 instead of a 5, and Dexter volunteers himself to cover James's parts, but only if that's okay with the rest of the group, telling us in his interview it's because he wants to impress Heejun. We're an hour away from the performance and the group are still a man down. Joseph Chang from episode 1 tells us in his interview that performing is basically do or die for a K-pop group, and you need to be able to connect with fans from the get-go. As if things aren't stressful enough for the group now they have had it confirmed that they've got to perform as a 4, Blaze's sore throat from earlier this week is also becoming worse. The boys are in what appears to be a school hall with all the students standing around them in like a circle and them just performing in the middle. This for some reason feels even more daunting to me than just performing on stage because they're literally surrounded by these students from all angles. There's nowhere to hide. The group is visibly nervous as they start their performance, but they go ahead anyway and the crowd cheers for them. They're singing over a pre-recorded backing track, so their vocals appear a lot stronger this time to us as the viewer, and they seem to have managed to change their formation successfully last minute to a 4, despite the uncertainty only that morning. We're now onto evaluation day with Heejun again, and rather than performing for them this time, she just watches back their first live performance from the school instead. The boys enter the room to greet Heejun and receive her feedback for the second time. She asks the group if they've had chance to see their performance with the live vocals yet. They say no, so she shows them, and watches for their reaction as they watch that back. They're all kind of cringing a bit because their vocals don't sound the greatest. Heejun asks them how they feel after watching that performance, and they all kind of say it's much worse than they thought. Heejun tells them that the reality is the students aren't fans who came to see them because they liked them. They were students who were asked to be there, and in future they will have paying people there to come and see them, and that's a completely different audience. She tells them that they get overexcited and forget how to sing and dance, getting lost in the moment and looking like little kids just running around. Heejun does thank Blaze, however, and says he has appeared to take on some of their feedback on his dancing, but moving forward, just because your throat hurts, deciding not to sing isn't an option. If you really can't sing, you at least need to lip sync properly, rather than keeping his mouth shut and barely trying. She says that it's a big mentality change that he needs to do. Heejun tells Ollie that he seems like he could do it, but he only sang where he felt like it, and then just stopped when he started to get out of breath. She also said he was very wooden when it comes to dancing because he was so in his head. Ollie apologizes to her and the group, but she says, "Don't be sorry to me, be sorry to yourself and the audience." Heejun says the member who worked hardest on stage was Reese, because although he wasn't perfect, at least he made the attempt to sing, but she comments on how he still doesn't look confident on stage, and if she sees him looking down at the floor while performing again, he's in trouble. He also apologizes to her and says their performance was horrendous and they should have done better. She just tells him to do better next time. Heejun then tells Dexter he gets way too excited on stage and sounds like he's just ran a marathon and just starts shouting instead of singing. She can see that he wants to do well, but the shouting just ruins the performance. She says they're trying to help them refine and work on that, but it feels as though he's not really taking on board the feedback. Heejun says if you hear their feedback and think, "Oh, I don't agree with that, so I'm not going to work on it," then there's no point in you being trained in Korea. He looks visibly upset by this, and as the group leaves the room, Reese thanks Heejun again while patting Dexter on the back in support. As the group are walking down the halls, we hear Dexter saying, "She doesn't want me," and Blaze comforting him saying, "That's completely not true, you were chosen." Dexter retaliates that she didn't say to anybody else there's no point in you being here. There was no consequences of them getting thrown out with their critiques, only his. Ollie tells Reese he disagrees with his comment that they were horrendous out there, and the episode ends with Dexter telling us that his biggest insecurity is that he's not wanted here. Okay, moving on to episode 3. The synopsis for this one says, "The band attempt the bedrock of any K-pop group, the music video." This episode starts by telling us, well, exactly that. This week the boys will be filming their first music video. But first of all, the voiceover starts by telling us that Blaze and Dexter have come to terms with Heejun's brutal feedback and are now in better spirits. The pair discuss how emotions were high in the moment, but Dexter says that he now just wants to prove her wrong. Ollie and Reese are also discussing their feedback with James, who of course could not participate last week, joking about how Reese seems to get off a little bit easy with Heejun, but Ollie agrees with her feedback to him. We find out the song the boys will be learning this week is called Life is a Movie, and again has a wide vocal range just like last week. This also comes with a new choreography, their most complex yet. This time they'll be performing these in their first music video for Heejun to evaluate. James is a little more confident this week, saying that performing to a camera is his specialty. That's what he does. Unfortunately, before they can even start on this week's choreo, we're told that the welfare team have noticed a problem problem with Blaze's knee, so he has been sent to the doctor for treatment. The doctor says he has an inflamed tendon and suggests that Blaze rests his leg, but he says that it's just not possible for him at the moment with his schedule, and he's worried about having to interrupt rehearsals so soon after James's absence too. He rejoins the boys in the practice room, telling them he's going to be out for 3 days. The voiceover next tells us that K-pop is so heavily focused on image, so the group now needs a look of their own before going into filming their music video. So stylists Cherry and Nara are here to help. They first tried to find inspiration from the boys' own wardrobes, or closets, and they all got complimented on their own individual styles. Then they went to the rooftop terrace to discuss what the group's look would be. Cherry and Nara had prepared 4 concepts for them. The first is very young and casual. Concept 2 is schoolboys, which is of course quite common in K-pop. Concept 3 is grunge chic, which is more stronger than the other concepts. And the last one, concept 4, is a 90s uniform concept, also very popular in Korea. Cherry and Nara confirm that they can do a mixture of these concepts and ask the group for their thoughts, and James says he likes the idea of mixing numbers 1 and 3. Moving on, we join Dexter as he's working on controlling his vocals to sound less like he's shouting and more confident rather than straining to reach those higher notes. While it seems Dexter is making progress vocally, we also see that Blaze is not. He tells us that he's finding it really tough because he's using parts of his voice he isn't used to, but the vocal coach is working with him to try various techniques to improve where he can. Back in the practice room, Blaze also has another issue. His leg injury is still prohibiting him from choreo training. He is not enjoying sitting out and watching because he says he's a very active person. So even though he knows this is best, it's very frustrating for him. James says as the weeks went on, the choreography was getting more complex and technical, and the choreographers were getting more and more frustrated with them too. While the choreographer on screen seems upset with the boys for being off in the video they're watching back from rehearsal, the voiceover assures us that K-pop coaches may appear harsh, but this is because it's used as a tool to motivate trainees and help them reach the high standards required to become an idol. The choreographer asks the group if they really want this or if they're just being forced to do it, because if they don't want to do it, then he doesn't want to waste his time with them either. He explains that no matter what he tells them, the group doesn't seem to want to listen. He says if they continue not to listen, he'll just give up on them one by one and doesn't understand why they came all the way here from the UK if they're not willing to improve. On their way back to the house, the voiceover tells us that the long working days and harsh feedback has been leaving the group feeling more and more exhausted. The boys discuss how they feel like they're giving it their all, but it's frustrating to hear comments like, "Do you even want to be here? Because why would they sacrifice their entire lives for 3 months if they didn't want this?" But at the same time, the group does agree that those sorts of comments somehow motivate them to prove them wrong and that they're fully committed. The next morning, Blaze is finally able to start learning the choreography. However, Dexter has now picked up a neck injury. Fortunately, rather than pulling him from training, the medic said he could just put a heat pack on it and carry on. The group are now back with Cherry and Nara to see the looks they have chosen for them and have their fitting for the music video. They all try on their potential outfits, which suit them really well. The stylists did a great job in finding outfits that are perfect for them, and they're so happy with their new looks and seeing everything come together. We then get this cute scene of the boys seemingly having a bit of a night picnic at the park, where Ollie tells us that even though they haven't been in Korea that long, they've been through so much together that they're already starting to feel like a family. However, the cute moment is short-lived because he tells us, like with any family, they did start to have some tension. He tells us that it was beginning to get a little bit difficult between Blaze and James, and we see some awkward scenes of them sort of bickering in the car. To help them release some of their tensions and stress, this week's fun activity is fighting. The group go to a belt wrestling centre where they watch some wrestling taking place before getting ready to do it themselves, umpired by none other than Shindong, of course. Reese and Dexter go head to head first, with Reese winning. Reese then faces Ollie, with Reese winning again. Reese then fights Blaze, and Blaze won this time. The final showdown, of course, was Blaze versus James. That felt correct considering what we'd been told earlier about them having issues. In the end, Blaze comes out victorious, but the boys all had fun letting off some steam and bonding. We join the group the next day discussing this week's evaluation pending. Blaze wants to show Heejun that he has been working on improving his singing and says it wouldn't hurt for Heejun to say some more positive things, which the group all agree with because it's hard hearing just negative things all the time. The group are having their last vocal rehearsal, going over the song and the choreo at the same time. First, the vocal coach reviews their vocals, telling Reese that he's a bit behind the others and Ollie is also getting some vocal critiques. Dexter is again critiqued on how his vocals become unstable when dancing and singing at the same time. EXO Suho tells us that training is tough, at least 8 hours a day of practicing. Next, the choreographer is here to help them tidy up the dance. They're told that their dancing is too tense, and if they get excited, the audience will also be excited, but they weren't. He also says the details they practiced just weren't there at all. Blaze tells us that if you cannot take criticism, you will struggle to get through the K-pop training program. Their practices were recorded again and again with them singing live, and whichever one the coaches feel is best is the one that will be given to Heejun to review their vocals. The group finally get a compliment from the vocal coach, who tells them he can see they have improved a lot, and it's nice to see them working like a team now. The next day, the boys arrive at the location to film their music video, Youngmaland, which is an abandoned amusement park. They meet with Cherry and Nara to do their hair and makeup. Ollie loved getting his done, and the boys tell him he looks like Princess Diana. We see him FaceTiming his mum and Nana to show them his hair and makeup. The group were overwhelmed to see how many people work behind the scenes at a K-pop music video. And Rise's Anton tells us that music videos are an essential part of K-pop. A good music video can really project you around the world. We don't see them actually filming the music video, but we do get to watch it, and it looks the real deal. They look the part, they look confident and like a proper boy band. They really feel positive after the filming too. The next day is Judgment Day, aka Evaluation Day. Heejun and her team first review the team's live vocals from the practice room video, and then watches the lip-synced music video performance before the boys enter the room to receive their feedback. Heejun tells them that she knows they worked hard in the video shoot and it does look good, but when you look more closely, it wasn't great. She says the reason it looks bad is because they don't look like a team at all, and everybody is so focused on not making any mistakes or standing out during their parts. Heejun commends Dexter on being a good person, very nice and honest, but he's also like an open book, so she can see when he dances and when he gets overexcited, that's when he makes more mistakes, and it's like he doesn't listen to the others and loses rhythm and everything he practiced. She says Ollie has improved a lot, but his movements are still too small. James is told he naturally looks good and handsome on stage, but he doesn't put the time and effort into learning the dance. Reese is told he looks good in the video, but sometimes loses rhythm in the performance because he's impatient, and that is just his personality, but if he's going to be famous, he needs to fix that. Finally, Blaze gets his critiques, and Heejun tells him he looks good if you see him alone, but when you look at the group as a whole, he's not that good. She thinks it's because he has a different vibe from the others. It doesn't mean that his vibe isn't good, but it just doesn't blend well with the rest of the group. Heejun tells them that for the next evaluation, they need to work more as a team, asking them to seriously consider if one of them had to return back to the UK, then who would it be? We see the group reviewing their feedback after they leave the room, and Blaze said he's struggling to find his position within the group and where he stands at the moment. They didn't say anything about what he does well or brings to the group in a positive way. Meanwhile, Heejun calls an emergency meeting with the group's manager over her concerns on whether or not the band will work. She tells him if it was her, she would take more time to monitor the boys, and the way they work is by monitoring trainees for a long period of time, rather than finalising the group's lineup from the get-go. So if somebody doesn't fit, then they can look at options of replacing them. Russ tells Heejun that from their point of view, that's the last thing they want to do, because he genuinely believes in these 5 boys. They're only 50 days in, and he tells them that what we're getting now is just the beginning of the magic, and he fears that if they replace one of the members, it could be even worse. He says he knows he can make this group work, and Heejun laughs while telling him he's like a father to them, but asks that he doesn't let the group know how much he loves them. As the members who have received the most criticism are Dexter, James, and Blaze, one by one, the band's management meets with them to check on their welfare. We find out here that Blaze is taking his criticism harder than the other boys, and he tells management that he's feeling like he's an expendable piece of the group. They see him in only 2D, looking right past him. Russ tells Blaze that he needs to show them that he wants to be here, but Blaze queries what in his actions so far would show anything other than the fact he clearly wants to be here. Blaze explains how he tries to put his emotions aside to focus on improving, and therefore has tunnel vision, so he can understand why that might come across as though he's angry or upset with a bad attitude. Russ assures him that it's not SM's decision to make regarding whether or not he gets cut from the band, but we do also have to respect and understand what they're saying. Blaze tells Russ that he doesn't really feel as though the team at SM are trying to help, but more so that they're against him and don't want him. After his meeting, rather than joining the boys, Blaze leaves the building and turns off his phone. So we see the boys worried and trying to get hold of him. When they finally do, he tells the boys he's figured out what all the drama was, and in his words, they're basically trying to kick me out of the band. The boys look very shocked, but the episode ends here before he can elaborate. Episode 4, and we're over halfway. This episode synopsis says the boys try to build bridges with member Blaze, who's feeling isolated. The episode starts by telling us that Blaze returned to the house eventually, and the group are now at a cafe to discuss their feedback. Blaze feels as though Heejun hasn't really taken the time to understand them, and is still judging the group based on their first impressions at surface level. He says she doesn't seem to want to make the effort to understand them at a deeper level, but they still have to just do whatever she says. Ollie tells us that they're all worried that Blaze hasn't taken the feedback on board, and it's just kind of gone over his head with all the frustrations. The group have now also been informed of some rules that they're struggling to deal with. No more tattoos, no girls, etc. But Blaze says regardless he's going to get tattoos. James, however, says he understands the rules because their cohesive image is important, and if one of them has loads of tattoos, it makes them look different rather than as like a unit. Blaze disagrees and says looking like a unit is important, but so is their individualism, and tells us he doesn't think it's fair that Reese and James were trying to tell him not to get tattoos when they already have them themselves. James tells us that despite talking things through with Blaze, he still has a bad attitude, and his future with the band needs to be resolved. The voiceover tells us that this week the group need to focus on working as a team, with EXO's Suho saying that the key to working well as a group is good chemistry. Their new song this week is called Classic and has another complex choreo. A new choreographer, Kyungwoo Lee, has been drafted in especially for this routine, and we join them with him in the practice room. Blaze says this is their most intricate choreography they've had yet, but it's very fun. The voiceover tells us that Blaze is becoming increasingly concerned of how his attitude is perceived by the other members and their coaches. So we see him individually asking the choreographer for more feedback on anything he may be doing differently that he should fit. The choreographer tells him that there's nothing at the moment and he's currently blending in well with the group. Blaze tells the boys he feels like he's constantly on edge now, constantly being watched, so the next day he is sent to check in with wellness coach Jeannie Chang. He explains to her how he's been told he's rude to people and has a bad attitude, but he's always trying to be hardworking, so hearing that is throwing him off. She tells him all he can really do is apologise for coming across that way and ask how he can improve moving forward. After hearing about the turmoil Blaze has been feeling, narrator's word, Heejun randomly turns up one day unannounced while the group are rehearsing, asking for Blaze to come and see her. The group never see her outside of evaluations, so we're worried that this was something as serious as Blaze being sent home and removed from the group. We don't see Blaze's meeting with Heejun, but he tells us he was very honest with her, explaining how much he's been struggling, and at the end she asked him if she could trust him in whether or not he wants to be part of the band. He told her that she can trust him and he wants to be here. He says he's very much willing to change and grow from this, but he doesn't really know where he's at with the boys. He really cares for them, but it's not coming across the right way, so he needs to talk to them about it. Later that night, the boys gather in their kitchen to discuss what's been going wrong with the band. Blaze tells the group that after his meeting with Heejun, he's had a realization about how he's portraying himself and that it's not coming across in the right way. So in future, if he does anything that upsets them, he would like them to tell him. Ollie tells Blaze that the group feel as though when they try to bring up issues with him, they know he will fight back and there'll be tension, and everybody agrees with this. They tell Blaze to stop fighting and release some of that pressure in his brain. They want him to be here and they want to work with him. Blaze apologizes for the way he's been coming across up until now and says he really appreciates how much they care for him. They all give him a big hug. Next, we see the boys going out into Itaewon and having fun in a club, dancing, letting off some steam and having a good time. But it's very quickly the next day and the group are back in rehearsals learning this week's dance. And this week's is very demanding, so they're struggling with just the basics. The boys tell us how the routine needs a lot of stamina, which they don't understand how Reese has at all because his diet is generally quite bad. A lot of processed food, no fruit or vegetables, etc. So to help Reese discover more food and mix up his eating habits, Blaze, Ollie and the K-pop cowboy take him to Gwangjang Market to try some street food. They try all sorts of unusual foods. I don't need to go into too much detail here because some of them are gross, so the less said the better. While the group jokes about struggling to improve Reese's diet, we also hear more seriously about Dexter's struggles with type 1 diabetes, sometimes having to inject himself up to 5 times a day to deal with it. He tells us it's been a rough few weeks for him, battling with stabilizing his blood sugar levels, which go up more when he's in pressure situations. He says battling with diabetes is exhausting because he's trying to juggle balancing that with this new experience. Back in the vocal studio, Ollie and Reese are practicing hitting the high notes for their new song, Classic. The vocal coach tells Ollie he's gotten much better, and Reese is used to singing in his higher range, but Classic has 2 notes that are even higher than his capabilities, so he's working on those. And in good news, Blaze is making some progress using his lower singing. In one of the practice rooms, James hears some worrying news from his twin brother Lewis back home. Lewis tells James that he's been in A&E, that's accident and emergency, so the emergency room in the UK, for 8 hours with what appears to be fluid on his lungs. When Lewis was 15, James tells us that Lewis had pneumonia, which was nearly fatal, and James is stressing now because this is all happening while he's thousands of miles away and he can't be there to make sure his brother's okay. James then finds it hard to focus on the choreography for the rest of the day, with his brother being unwell playing on his mind. He tells us that his head was a total mess and he couldn't concentrate. For this week's fun activity to take the group's mind off things, they meet up with Shindong in an old village to try on hanbok for the first time. Shindong tells them about some old Korean stories and folklore, and then they go into what appears to be like a haunted house. It's full of like old creepy things, people jumping out at them, that sort of thing. They're all terrified but have fun, you get the gist. Before their next rehearsal begins, James tells the boys that his brother is out of hospital now, so that's like a massive weight being lifted off his shoulders. The group go back to practice, and because this choreo is still hard, they're using a blindfold technique, which is where some of the members are blindfolded while they run the dance to help them work on their positioning. The group actually enjoy doing this because it allows them to go over the choreography but in a fun and different way. There's only 1 day left until evaluation when they have their last vocal rehearsal. Reese gets critiqued on his hitting the high notes while dancing. When watching their performance, Reese is so embarrassed that he gets more frustrated and upset each time they run over it. Eventually, the pressure piles up so much that he begins to cry while watching his performance back. Rather than yelling or being frustrated with him, the vocal coach can see how disappointed he is in himself and tries to help him go over it again and again until he can perfect it. And then when he finally nails it, everybody cheers for him. On their bus on the way home, the boys get a video message from their favourite group in Korea so far, aespa. The girls tell them that the road to debut can be very hard, but gives them words of encouragement to keep them going, and the boys are freaking out with excitement because that's their favourite K-pop group so far. The next day is evaluation day, and they have to perform their song Classic at the Gwanghalu Pavilion. However, because it's springtime, Dexter and Ollie are battling their hay fever, and separately, Dexter is also struggling with his diabetes, blaming himself for not being able to regulate it as well as he wants to, even though the members say that's something he can't control. The group feel as though there's been a development in them as a band this week, and we get to see their live singing and dance performance of the song Classic. At evaluation, Heejun watches the group's performance back as usual before inviting the boys in to receive their feedback. Heejun asks Blaze how it was having a heart-to-heart, and he says he feels it brought the group closer. Heejun says this is what they lacked last time, but this time she feels that a lot has been sorted out, and she can see Blaze is working on the chemistry which showed in his performance. She tells Ollie that his singing was good, but she knows he lacks confidence in dancing. Despite the pressures, he was still stable in the performance. Heejun tells Dexter that he's filled with so much joy and happy energy when he starts, but because of that, he can't control or properly conserve his breathing. Because he doesn't do that, his voice is shaky. Heejun tells Reese that she's said from the beginning he can do everything well, so he shouldn't cry or get angry when he doesn't hit high notes, because this is a very long process. It doesn't happen all at once. If it was easy, everybody would become a star and an artist, and crying and getting angry is something that babies do. And there the episode ends on that bombshell. On to episode 5, and the synopsis says, the band need to improve their stamina and enroll on a military fitness boot camp, but the K-pop creator Hee Jun-yoon has a surprise evaluation which challenges the band like never before. The episode starts with the boys going for a relaxing day at Mount Namsan to look at the views, but their relaxation is very short-lived when they next go to the military training site with Shindong to work on their stamina. The voiceover explains to the viewer how military service is mandatory in Korea, and the instructor tells them that K-pop idols have strong stamina, not just because they do military training, but also because they have a strong mentality. We see the group doing a variety of exercises, running, screaming, all of that, but after only their warm-up, Reese seems to be struggling. He goes completely pale and says he can't see, everything is blurry. hurry. He takes a few minutes to sit on the floor and regather himself. Reese says he doesn't understand why this is happening to him. It's never happened before. The others tell him he might just be dehydrated. Once he was feeling better, he rejoins the group and they did an assault course in which they needed to work together as a team to test their teamwork. The group successfully completed the course and in less than the allocated time they were given. They then do another assault course, this time while under fire of paintballs from the sergeant and Shindong. They complete that one too and have a moment of, if we can do this, then we can conquer whatever life throws at us in this career. We find out that for this week's evaluation, Heejun will be surprising them, but we aren't told exactly how yet. But we do learn that there will be also a test on their recording of a new song titled Time With You. Because this week they'll be just evaluated on the recording of their song, there is no new choreography for them to learn, so they can focus on just the vocals. We see Dexter trying to work on shouting less in his singing, and the vocal coach asks him to control his breathing better while he sings. We next see Ollie being taught some different vocalization techniques to improve his lung efficiency. Reese works on vocal exercises to help him hit those high notes he struggled with previously. Blaze is working on raising the placement of his voice to try and sing higher. The wellness coach meets with Dexter to hear how he's coming to terms with the latest Heejun feedback. They discuss what the hardest parts have been so far, and how he sometimes feels like you have to give yourself praise while you're getting so many critiques to get through it. Dexter tells Jeannie that it's nice to have the boys support him, but the thing he really craves at the moment is approval from the higher up. James tells us that fitness is really important for him, for both his mental health and his abilities to perform. So we see him running, trying to work on his stamina, because the military training was a wake-up call for him. We then see James and Ollie buying tons of ice for an ice bath, which they casually do on their terrace. The voiceover tells us that James and Ollie have developed a bromance during their time in Korea. James tells us he and Ollie have just clicked in a close way, and we see a very cute compilation of them having fun together during their trip, both of them saying they are glad to have each other in the group. We rejoin the boys rehearsing their new ballad a cappella so they can hear themselves and each other. The vocal coach has them go over the notes they're struggling with over and over, and Dexter is told again to be wary of himself shouting rather than singing. The vocal coach tells them all that they're struggling with their stamina, and Reese says he has a sore throat today. The voiceover tells us that Reese's unhealthy lifestyle is now catching up with him. He's having a one-to-one session when he tells him he's struggling hitting the high notes today. So the vocal coach says even if they're recording for the cameras, he'd rather him stop for the day if he's going to hurt his voice more. In the next scene, we see the team have prepared a surprise for the boys in the light of their looming next evaluation. Messages from their family back home. James's parents tell him how much they miss him. Reese's mum tells him how proud she is of his work ethic and of course that they miss him too. Blaze's video is from the whole family eating at his favourite restaurant, joking that it's a shame he can't enjoy the food with them. Dexter gets a message from his mum who says she misses him and can't wait to give him a hug when he's back, and another message from his brother telling him how proud of him he is. Ollie receives a message from his mum, Nana, and Dog. His mum tells him that she's honoured to be his mum and that he's such a talented, hard-working, loving boy. He's in tears as he watches their message and tells us he didn't realise he was homesick or holding anything in until that moment, explaining to the boys that he has a small family, so they mean a lot to him. We rejoin the boys in the studio and their song is now ready to record for Heejun to evaluate. We watch a bit of the video of the group recording the song, and now it's time for evaluation day. As usual, Heejun watches their performance back first, this time the vocal only one, and then the boys are invited in for her feedback. Heejun tells them that they got to hear both the studio and isolated versions of their audio. She starts with James, telling him that they were very surprised because he is now hitting notes he couldn't before with remarkable stability. It's like he's become a completely different singer. Heejun tells Blaze that he has a naturally lower range, and it appears he's discovered how to use it to create a compelling sound. It would be nice to next try to blend this with the group. Ollie is told his singing has become very stable, which is crucial for the team. He anchored the vocals well for the song, so he should do that more moving forward. His next step is to work with the vocal coaches to learn how to express emotions in songs. Reese is told he did so good. He has a superb tone and his coaches said he's able to reach all the high notes and is able to perform them well live. However, if something doesn't go his way, all those great qualities disappear. And lastly for Dexter, Heejun says, how can we fix this? She says he's very sincere and genuinely a kind and passionate person, but he is struggling with control in every area. She says she has spoken to him about this from the very beginning, but he hasn't seemed to improve. Heejun even says when they sing as a group, group, there's an unpleasant sound and it's always Dexter. All Dexter can really do is tell her he will work on it and make it better. Heejun tells the group as a whole that they've improved, but they're not perfect and they need to see where they are right now to see how much is needed to prepare for the future. She tells them that the feedback ends here, but they will next go into the practice room and perform live for her as a team. All 5 of their songs so far. They're all very shocked and clearly nervous to be thrown into this out of the blue. We see them starting with their first song from week 1. She says next, and they move on to the next one, Solar, from week 2, but they struggle with that one because they used all their stamina on song 1. Heejun comments on how shocked she is that they're so out of breath after only 2 songs, saying they're not even halfway yet and everything's a mess. They could never perform a full concert at Wembley like this. She asks them to start again from the first song, all over again, and the group struggle a lot with their nerves and stamina. They're exhausted and it shows in their vocals. This time they get past the second song, performing every song one after another. The group all agreed, however, that although this was nerve-wracking for them, it was an important lesson because they're so used to working themselves up to perform one song at a time for evaluation. What happens when they need to learn how to push through a whole set of songs and be more resilient? As they finish, Heejun tells them to remember this experience when they come to perform at a concert one day. Later on, Dexter is unfortunately struggling to come to terms with not impressing Heejun for another evaluation. The members try to reassure him that the SM team want him to do well because they're asking how can we work on this rather than just telling him he isn't good enough and sending him home. But Dexter walks away in frustration when he is followed out with a member of the welfare team who can see he's struggling to process his emotions. He angrily throws, I think it's his water bottle, at the wall, which is where the episode ends. And we're on to the final episode, episode 6. The synopsis for this one says, as their 100 days draw to an end, the band must impress at the British Embassy and a room full of eager K-pop fans. Will they win Hee Jun-yoon's approval before heading home? The last song the group will be learning is called Best Days of Our Lives, and this week they have a new choreography to learn too. This week is the last week, so they'll be performing at the British Embassy in Seoul and for an audience of K-pop fans in their first show. The episode starts with the group actually coming up with a group name, and oh my gosh, dearyoongi editor's note here. Can I just say I'm so relieved? This whole time I've been thinking, I'm dying to know what this group are actually called, but I didn't want to Google it and get spoilers. They go through all sorts of names, some of them sounding like rock band names, some of them they thought were great ideas, ended up being names that already existed. They even joked about calling themselves NCTEA, like the British version of NCT. In the end, they think they found the perfect name for all of them based on their favourite restaurant in Itaewon, Dear Alice. And sorry, another dearyoongi editor's note again. I have been waiting this whole time, excitedly to hear what their group name is, only to then find out it's literally half of my username. Can we just? In rehearsals, Dexter is working on his vocals, explaining to him how his feedback has been so far. The vocal coach tells him if he dwells on the negative feedback, he will lose confidence entirely, and his vocals will get worse rather than improve. The voiceover explains how K-pop groups need a strong social media presence to succeed globally, and that the boys' social media content creation journey starts today, with the K-pop cowboy at a water park just outside of Seoul. They get on a speedboat with a selfie stick, and they compete head-to-head on a water park obstacle course, with the loser getting a forfeit, which ends up being Ollie. However, I don't think we see him get a forfeit. Instead, the boys trick K-pop cowboy into taking a selfie with them, only to end up throwing him into the water in the name of content, but they all join him in there anyway. 3 hours after the water park, Dexter is back at the rehearsal room, practicing by himself to overcome his issue with shout singing, but he is still struggling the next day, so he confides in the best singers in the group, as the voiceover says, Ollie and Reese, to help him get some tips. Reese recommends singing more with his diaphragm instead, and Ollie says it's about how much breathing you use to blend with the group. He tells them the note he's been struggling with the most in their song Life is a Movie, and Ollie gives him some breathing tips to help him reach that note without giving too much breath into the song to make it sound like a shout instead of a sing. And he does appear to make some progress. 24 hours later, and it's time for the group's performance at the British Embassy in Seoul, and they're going to be performing in front of a lot of important people, including Heejun and the rest of the SM team. The group, now known as Dear Alice, perform their very first song and receive a lot of applause when they're done. But before the guys' next performance, the concert one, they're back in rehearsals with their choreographer, who is pushing them to put their all into practice even though they're exhausted. Reese explains how they start at 7:30 in the morning and don't finish until 11. I'm of course going to assume he means PM, and then the same again the next day. Blaze is working on trying to sing in those higher octaves, but tells us he can see a way forward now. Ollie is working on what was previously his wooden dance moves, and James explains that Ollie's issue is simply that he feels embarrassed when dancing. To build up the group's confidence before their concert, they decide to go and sing some of their songs in front of Han River to random passers-by. This is to help them conquer their fears of feeling embarrassed, and they do end up getting a bit of an audience and people filming them, so it was a success. Back with their vocal coach, James is working on his confidence and control, trying to sing and dance at the same time. The vocal coach tells him sometimes you need to compromise between the desired tone and running out of breath. In his vocal rehearsals, Dexter gets told that he's doing much better. Elsewhere, Ollie is determined to overcome the awkwardness he feels when watching himself dance. The boys now meet up with Shindong for a Korean excursion, seeing him for the last time to find out what their futures hold and go to meet a shaman. She explains how they will be speaking to the mountain spirits to wish them good luck and see what their future has in store for them. Ollie is told that he has good energy, so don't worry and keep it inside. Express it more instead. Dexter is told he has the most courage out of the 5. Reese is told that he has a lot of passion but needs to be careful of being too impulsive and doing bad things. Blaze is told he needs a lot of love and he's been feeling very lonely because he has a desire to feel loved, but if he just believes in himself, it'll come to him. And James is told his heart is aching and that he cries a lot, but he can do it. This hits him hard and he tells us he wasn't expecting to be read like that. The fact she saw straight through him is what made him feel emotional. The day of their debut performance in front of K-pop fans comes around very quickly. There's a crowd of excited K-pop fans there to see them, and we get to watch their performance of their new song, and they do really well. The audience seemed really happy with their stage and enjoyed it. We see interviews with some of the audience members who said they looked like real idols. Now it's time for their last evaluation with Heejun, who watches back a recording of their concert before inviting them for their last ever evaluation with her, and of course they're super nervous. Heejun tells them that she was worried before their performance at the embassy because they'd be performing in front of so many people and contending with the weather outdoors, but they did a lot better than she expected, and what impressed her the most was how composed they remained as they did. She says that she can see they finally started to rely on one another as a team, just as she requested, and that improved their overall energy. Heejun says they've become a completely different team from when she first saw them, which shows they're improving every day. She thanks Dexter for working so hard on the feedback they gave him, and this time she didn't see the issues he had previously. They could tell he'd really put in the work to control his energy and excitement on stage. She thinks they improved significantly in a short time, and that's because they opened up their hearts to the feedback. Now all that's left for them to do is to have a few parting words with Heejun, and she wants to speak to them individually. She presents each of them with a gift, and it's a seal with their name on it in Korean. People use those seals as their signatures in Korea, and she explains how it's something parents usually give to their children when they start work. From this, Reese asks if this means they're going to work, which Heejun of course finds funny. Heejun also has a card for each of the members with a personal note written for each of them about their strengths and complimenting them as people too. This is probably my favourite scene in the whole show because it really humanises Heejun, somebody that was made out to be this big scary person throughout the whole show, and shows that she did care for them more than they realised and just wanted them to be the best they could be. It was all about giving them feedback and never personal, even though it might have felt that way at times. Blaze tells us that this has been one of the most difficult experiences he's ever had, but what doesn't kill you makes you stronger. Reese asks Heejun if they can make it as artists if they work hard, and she jokingly says, as long as you don't get into trouble, yeah. In an interview with us, which I think is her only one in the whole show, Heejun tells us that she feels the group has grown a lot in terms of skill and maturity. The show ends with us seeing the group leave the SM building for the very last time, thanking them and saying, we'll see you soon. Dexter tells us that he now feels like he has 4 brothers and is happy to have gone on this journey with them. Heejun tells us that she will continue to monitor the group and their journey in future. The show ends with Reese saying, this isn't the end, this is just the beginning. And then it's time for the where are they now, aka my favourite part of the documentary, which is quite simple in this one. It just says, Dear Alice are currently working on their debut album. And that is it for our summary of the show. That was definitely a long one and a lot of content, so thank you everyone who stuck stuck with me through that, but I hope it saved you at least from watching a whole documentary. So now I think it's time for me to share my overall thoughts on the documentary. First thing I can comfortably say is that, to be honest, the documentary wasn't really what I was expecting from the start. I didn't read too much into the show before I started watching it. I don't like spoilers, which was probably my own fault, but all I knew was that the BBC were going to try and create a British boy band using K-pop methods at SM Entertainment. I thought it was going to be like their attempt to make a new One Direction, a group of that success, but make it K-pop, you know? So I thought this meant that what we would be doing is joining a group of trainees from the very beginning of their journey, where there's like a group of them who train for a while to join the group's lineup, and then when they choose the lineup, we follow them for the remainder of the show, kind of in like an X Factor meets Korean survival show style format crossover, if that makes sense. Whereas when we meet the group in the very beginning, the lineup has already been chosen, and we're only briefly told about the audition process. I think perhaps if the show had been longer and more episodes, maybe they could have done it in that sort of format, and it would have been more realistic to show us the methodology of K-pop training put into practice right from the beginning of choosing the people in the group. But they decided against that to keep the show at 6 episodes and more palatable, in my opinion. In the end, it felt a lot more like I was watching a pre-debut documentary of a group I already knew and loved, because that's kind of what it felt like at times. Sort of like that one documentary that was released for LE SSERAFIM, for example, after their debut, except we didn't know who any of these boys were yet because we haven't really seen them debut. So it's kind of like opening a book you haven't read before from the middle, reading a few pages and then going back to the start, you know? But with that aside, I must admit, I think I did kind of enjoy this documentary and the pacing of it. The editing was very British at times. By this, I mean it definitely tried to tell a story. For some reason, British shows do this thing where they like to tell you the same thing over and over again, sometimes to build up a story and make sure you're still on track in case, you know, you're watching it 1 week at a time and like really forgot what was going on, no matter how simple the thing they're repeating over and over it was to remember. But unlike other documentaries I have watched and even commented on in the past on this channel, it didn't feel as though they were dragging out content to try and make 6 episodes where there was only 3 or 4 episodes of content. Each episode had something new happening, whether it was the group learning a new song, facing new challenges, or experiencing new things in Seoul. And I think that was nice because it was very easy to keep an audience member engaged for 45 minutes in that way. I'll be honest, I'm a really bad binge watcher. I struggle watching multiple episodes of a TV show in one sitting because I get bored and distracted, which I know is really ironic as a K-pop YouTuber who has decided to do videos watching back and reviewing docuseries now. But here we are. But the show even managed to keep an irregular binge watcher like myself entertained enough to keep watching, which is impressive. Although I don't know if this is just because I, of course, as an ex-One Direction fan turned K-pop fan, have a soft spot for boy bands, but I also find myself kind of getting attached to these boys, and I guess sort of wanting to see them do well, if that makes sense. Because we got to see them getting harsh feedback and then working really hard to rectify their faults. When each evaluation came around, I was also hoping that Heejun would see how much they've been trying to improve just as much as they were. I think sharing snippets of each member's individual struggles helped a lot. It didn't feel like they were playing them up too much on playing on one member and their faults for shock factor, but it allowed us the opportunity to see each member and the challenges they were going through and how they were trying to combat them. This helped a lot with helping the audience develop a fondness for these boys and made us want to see them succeed. Okay, I have been nice enough. You guys want to hear the flip side of the coin here. And as nice as I can be, I think there was a major issue with this documentary, and that was the accuracy in the portrayal of idol trainee life. I feel like this documentary only scratched the surface of what exactly idol trainee life contains. I'm torn here because a part of me understands completely that this documentary was more likely aimed at an audience of non-K-pop fans, who have only heard people casually say, oh, K-pop idols train for loads of years to become an idol, and don't really know exactly what that means and entails, but maybe were curious to hear more, so would check this documentary out. Therefore, some of the more real and probably much more harsher and brutal aspects of idol trainee life are not really explored during this documentary, such as strict diets, getting no sleep from schedule to schedule, and trainees around you getting cut. All of these things maybe were mentioned casually in passing, but in a much more simplified and I guess PG way, in attempts to still make good television. If they really wanted to give this group of 5 boys the idol trainee experience, this would have been a much more miserable time, and it would have been very difficult to edit into a TV show that people wanted to watch and enjoyed watching. I also think that's why they had them do a fun activity every episode, and they weren't just vocal and dance training episodes, or else the viewing audience would have quickly grown bored of just watching people dance and sing for 12 hours of their day. But the problem with this is, singing and dancing for 12 hours a day is the reality of idol trainee life. Like Suho said himself, when you're not training, you're sleeping. Don't get me wrong, I'm not saying that trainees will have zero free time ever, but the reality is if these boys were real K-pop trainees, they would not be getting to go to theme parks or enjoying Itaewon's nightlife. I think we also have to strongly question the authenticity of the idea that they were here for 100 days but had 6 weekly evaluations. Based on that logic, that only takes us to around 42 days of training if they had 1 evaluation every week for 6 weeks. But by episode 3, in Russ's meeting with Heejun, he tells her that they've only been training for 50 days, which realistically would mean they have more than 1 week each week to work on their dance, which of course makes sense. It's difficult for a brand new group to prepare a brand new performance and sing and dance a new song every week. It would have been completely understandable if they were just honest with us and told us they had maybe 2.5 weeks to work on each performance. But no, they chose to tell us that they had to do a new stage every week, which I found interesting. If that is true, then what was the other 50 days for? But if it wasn't true, did they just say that for shock factor, even if it's not entirely accurate? I know in a way we can't exactly judge the show for not giving them the full idol trainee experience, because it can be brutal and not exactly healthy. Some things are not worth risking for an experiment, and they wouldn't necessarily be training to this extreme of a level when they're back living and working as a group in the UK anyway. Sure, they might maintain some of the disciplines that K-pop training taught them, but they won't be living under as brutal a circumstance as weekly evaluations or the risk of being cut always on their shoulders. But at the same time, I do struggle with the show marketing itself as a group being put through the ringer to try K-pop idol trainee methodologies, when really all that meant in this case was just lots of singing and dancing training, which would basically be expected of any boy band who wanted to sing and dance in their song. Okay, before we wrap it up, let's discuss what exactly this documentary taught us about idol trainee life, because that is the main reason I wanted to watch and review this documentary. Like we already said, I can definitely see that this documentary is aimed at people who might not know as much about K-pop as you and I, or people who are more aware of the brutalities of idol trainee life already, because it describes a lot of the harshities in rather watered down, simplified ways. But at the same time, it's still quite rare to be able to get an insight into the weekly evaluation process in this way, and I think rather than learning about the process itself, which is simple to understand after week 1, what this show taught us more than anything is, as it went on, about the mental toll it can take on an individual when week after week you're trying your very hardest to do your best, only to be given negative feedback again and again. As each episode goes on, we can see the physical change in some of the members, such as Blaze and Dexter, who are trying their very best to take on board all the critiques they've been getting and improve, yet are told repeatedly that they still aren't quite hitting the mark. You can literally see the members becoming more disheartened in the moment, struggling to come to terms with their emotions, but then it lights a spark in them and motivates them to push on harder and prove people wrong. It's a really interesting behind the scenes insight into perhaps what we don't see from K-pop idols, which is the mental battles they have to fight within their own heads or against criticism that they face. We see a lot of people throwing hate around on social media. I talked about it a lot in my last video, but we don't really see how much idols have been going through in very similar processes, questioning certain aspects of their skills either during trainee days or after they've debuted. Every idol was once a trainee in this same position, and those who trained for years will have had to battle and conquer their self-doubt, thinking, if I'm not good enough, why am I still here? Will I ever debut? And those are really hard thoughts to come to terms with. Okay, time for a quick conclusion because I've definitely spoken for long enough. Overall, I am glad I watched this documentary. As a British person who has loved both British boy bands and K-pop boy bands, it was nice to see an unusual crossover that I wasn't expecting, and not done in a cringe way where it was like a British boy group trying to become a K-pop group. It's nice to see a crossover with a label as big as SM as well. It was very transparent for them to let the cameras into their training style in this way. While we're on the topic of conclusions, however, I would have definitely loved to see more of a conclusion in the show. We briefly see their manager discussing with Heejun how he cares for the boys, and she says he's like a dad to them. As their manager, it would have been nice to see him interacting with the group at the end of this process and experiment, revealing if they would or wouldn't be getting to debut in the UK. Because we didn't see that. It's almost as though it was just a given from the start that of course they'd get to debut back home. That might have been the case, of course, it's a TV show, show, but that's not what we were told. We were made to think it's like this big ultimatum of, will they succeed, won't they succeed, and it all depends on what Heejin thinks. But if it's ultimately Russ's decision as the person who will be supporting them back home, why don't we get to hear his thoughts on the end of their training? But negativity aside, I have to remember that this show wasn't perhaps aimed at us K-pop fans. It was supposed to be an entertaining and palatable way to welcome Western audiences into K-pop practices, and it did it in a mostly non-egregious way. I didn't feel offended as a K-pop fan, or that they were trying to portray K-pop fans as cringe, or trainee life as over the top like some dramatic documentaries have done before. I appreciate that the BBC was able to talk about and show K-pop idol trainee life in a respectful way. I'm not expecting this documentary to exactly get anybody into K-pop per se, but if it can at least help one person who thought K-pop idol training styles were unnecessary or over the top to see why things are done the way they are, and then they're able to appreciate what these idols do and why fans love it in a more respectful way, then I think it would make it a job well done. Okay guys, and that was it for today's video. Another long one and my second time watching a documentary, summarizing and reacting to it. I really hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, please give it a thumbs up, and I would love to hear your thoughts in the comments. Let me know what you thought about this documentary, whether you watched it or are learning about it from my video, and I'm always eager to hear your guys' thoughts on my videos. If you're new here, please hit that subscribe button and turn on the notification bell to be the first to hear whenever I upload. I promise my videos aren't always this long, and I'll see you next time. Bye guys!